Welcome back to Life in the Stands podcast. We got a great episode on deck for today. We're going to jump into the most improbable runs in Super Bowl history. We're going to debate the 2005 Steelers versus the 2007 Giants. We're also going to jump into our predictions for the wild card weekend. I guess it's Super Wild Card Weekend now, Bender. With that, let's jump right into the debate today. So the 2005 Steelers were the first 6 seed to ever win a playoff game, and then they went on to win the Super Bowl. The 2007 Giants knocked off the undefeated Patriots in the Super Bowl. Everyone remembers that game. What do you think was more improbable? Which run?
I think it's the Giants because honestly, if you look at it, nobody expected Eli Manning to be what he was in that era of New York football, to be honest. And here's where it's kind of tricky, right? So like Big Ben and the Steelers had to go through a lot of stacked teams. That was probably the best conference at the time, in my opinion. But Eli Manning wasn't looked at as a superstar. He was a game-managing quarterback, and he still ended up beating Tom Brady in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, those are all good points. I think this is interesting because it almost ties Big Ben's and Eli Manning's career together, and you don't normally think of their careers being very similar, but in a lot of ways they were. A couple of Super Bowl rings. I think each of them won a Super Bowl MVP. I could be wrong about that, but I think they both won one of the Super Bowl MVPs that they were in. Or actually, no, Big Ben didn't because it was 2 receivers. Antonio Holmes won it, and Hines Ward was the one that won it in 2005. But the defenses of each team, I think, have to be talked about a lot too. Obviously, you had Strahan in New York, but then you had James Harrison and Troy Polamalu, and obviously those early 2000s Steelers defenses. If you just look at the combined records of the teams that they had to beat, I mean, the Steelers' combined record of the teams that they had to play was like 51-10 or something like that. Or 51-15. I mean, they beat a couple of 13-3 teams. They beat a 14-2 team. They had that scare with Jerome Bettis against the Colts and Peyton Manning. But at the time, Peyton Manning was looked at almost really similar to Tom Brady, and Big Ben had to go in and beat Peyton Manning at home. So you could make the debate a lot of different ways to see which team had the more improbable run.
And stop. Eli Manning also had to go through Brett Favre, who's given a lot of credit as a top quarterback ever as well, just like Peyton Manning is.
Yep.
So you kind of have to compare the two that way. I don't know, though, because the Giants, I think a lot of momentum going into the playoffs matters. And the Giants, I believe, lost 2 of their last 3 games of the regular season going into the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And to beat my Dallas Cowboys, to beat the Packers, to beat all these, like the Buccaneers, to get to Tom Brady and beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, I think beating Brett Favre and Tom Brady kind of sets that in stone for a guy who's supposed to be an average quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And before we'll kind of wrap this segment up, then you guys will have to let us know which Super Bowl run you guys would thought was more improbable, whether it was the 2007 Giants or the 2005 Steelers. A couple of stats just to kind of back this up as well. The Giants were 14th in the NFL in points scored. The Steelers were 9th going into each of their respective playoff runs. The New York Giants defense was 17th in the NFL in points allowed. The Steelers defense was 3rd. So even though the Steelers were a 6-seed wildcard team, they were 11-5 themselves. The New York Giants were 10-6 as the 5-seed. So even going into the playoffs themselves, you could argue that the Steelers shouldn't have been that much of an underdog anyway. Also considering they were 11-5 and they were the number 1 seed in the AFC the year before in 2004. So a lot of the bones of a number 1 seeded team were still there in 2005. So I think if you look at some of those kind of things, you could almost make the argument too that it shouldn't have been improbable at all. The Steelers were almost miscast as a 6 seed in a loaded AFC at the time.
So I think we know who's losing this argument. The Steelers had talent on their team. Now, not that the New York Giants didn't, but it goes back to what I said. I think the AFC at the time was stacked compared to what the NFC was. You just said the records. Like the Steelers had 11-5 record as a 6 seed, and Giants were 10-6 as a 5 seed. Yep. That makes sense. That kind of shows you where the conferences were. Now it's 2 years apart, but it's still pretty accurate of what the conferences were at that year and time.
Yeah, definitely. And it also lets people know that as much as, they did change the playoff seeding to go to 7 seeds instead of 6, and that was semi-recent. But you saw, Detroit Lions players and Vikings players come out and say like, "Hey, we're gonna have a 14-win team have to go on the road in Wild Card Weekend." Well, that was maybe not to that extent wasn't happening back then, but you had quality teams that were wild card teams and had to go on the road in the playoffs, and the NFL didn't do anything about it back then. It's hard for me to imagine them doing something about it now, but we'll just have to wait and find out. Maybe they'll be open to doing some reseeding or doing something with conference opponents, division winners. We'll have to see. But remember to like and subscribe. Again, let us know down below in the comments which Super Bowl run you thought was more improbable, the 2007 Giants or the 2005 Steelers. Kind of sounds like we made our decision towards the Giants on this podcast, but we're going to jump into the Super Wild Card Weekend now. We're going to give some predictions for those games, Bender. Let's just start on the AFC side. Let's start with the Steelers and the Ravens, one of the big matchups. Everything going into the end of the season would tell you that this game is going to be a blowout, and everything that this rivalry tells you that it's going to be close for no reason.
The last part is what gets me on this decision, to be honest with you. I think the Ravens still win, though, because the Ravens have what they want to do set in stone. The Steelers are struggling right now, especially on offense. Now, the Steelers have a chance if they can hold the Ravens in check. Like, they always have a chance against Lamar, if I'm being honest with you, because of the defense. But if Russell Wilson is doing what he's doing, y'all don't have a chance at all.
It felt like the Ravens game was kind of the start of Russ's downfall, too, because, I mean, it was 7-7 in that game. We didn't have George Pickens. We didn't have Joey Porter Jr. We didn't have Dante Jackson in that last game against the Ravens. And we were one stupid Russell Wilson decision away from being down at the one. He got that huge hit near the goal line, and then the whole game changed from that point. But the Steelers were kind of in control of that game going down into score at that point. So, as long as there's not big mistakes, it could be really close. I do think that the Ravens still pull it out. There's just too much talent. Like there's too much of a talent discrepancy on these teams. And I think at the end of the day, the Ravens are just going to put up more points. Although the last thing I'll say is weather could be a big factor in this one too.
I agree, but going back to what you said about the Steelers-Ravens game that previously happened, big turnovers can make a difference. And the Steelers' defense, if they can turn Lamar over, his confidence might get shut down. That might be a game the Steelers take instead of the other way around.
Yep. Yeah. We'll see what defense is able to make those splash plays. I think it'll be one of the big deciding factors. Moving on to the next game in the AFC, the Chargers and the Texans.
This is a fun game. I'm rooting for both of these teams. Whoever comes out of this game, that's who I'm going with.
Yeah.
I kind of want to say, I don't want to say the Texans, but the Chargers are rolling. I'm going to take the Chargers.
I like Harbaugh in his first year back in the league. I think they have an identity in Los Angeles, and I think it's hard-nosed football. I think they're tough. They can go on the road and win a playoff game because they can run the football. They have an outstanding, quietly one of a top 3 defense in the NFL this year. So I really do like the Chargers. I think the Texans have been struggling too much as well. It's been an unfortunate year for injuries for them too. So I will also take the Chargers going on the road to beat the Texans. And the last game in the AFC, Broncos and Bills.
Bills, easy. I think this game's going to be close in the first half probably because the Broncos defense I think can hold up, but I think the Bills are going to run away.
I agree. I think the Broncos will come out firing. They're not a pushover of a team, but the Bills are at home. It's probably going to be a weather game as well.
Bo Nix's first playoff game.
Bo Nix's first playoff game. I think the Broncos are another year or two away. It's impossible. I mean, the fact that they're even in a playoff position with what they've had to do with the cap situation and Russell Wilson and everything that went on there, the fact that they're even here is absolutely impeccable. So they're a year or two away from really being competitive with the top teams. I just feel bad for Justin Simmons because he didn't go to the playoffs once while he was in Denver and then went to Atlanta this year. So it sucks to be him. Moving on to the NFC, let's go Vikings and Rams.
People are going to think I'm crazy for this one. I have the Rams.
I
don't think Sam Darnold has the playoff experience, and he just struggled against the Lions. I think that may have been the game where he got figured out. If the Rams can follow suit with that, it might be done for because Stafford's going to be firing.
Yep. I think Stafford is actually the X factor in this game because Goff and Stafford are similar ability quarterbacks. And I think that the blueprint was just put out now by Ben Johnson and Goff on what to do against that Brian Flores defense in Minnesota because they bring a lot at you and they make it really confusing and they try to have a lot of smoke and mirrors. But if there's a guy in the NFL that I'd trust in the playoffs to be able to face that and do it without turnovers and without making the big mistake, it'd be a guy like Matt Stafford. So I do like the Rams in this. I mean, the Vikings again though should be proud of their season. No one expected them to be where they are. So I think they're another one and done though, if I'm being honest. So Green Bay Packers and Eagles. This should be a good one.
Packers got hindered with some minor injuries, or not minor injuries, but enough to make my decision pretty easy. I'm not sure what the word is on Jalen Hurts yet. That would impact my decision. If he doesn't play, I'm picking the Packers. If he plays, I'm picking the Eagles. Jordan Love got some kind of minor injury in the previous game. Watson's out for the year. They do have depth at that position, though, so I'm not worried about that. More worried about Love's health, as
Yeah.
well as Jalen Hurts. Just going to be like banged up football, just running the football. I guarantee it's going to be a Josh Jacobs Saquon game, but I'm taking the Eagles.
Yeah, I'll take Saquon over Josh Jacobs. And I'll take a home field advantage for a banged up team over a road banged up team. I think that's kind of what it comes down to. If both teams are healthy and it's a neutral site game, I could see it being 3 overtimes. Like they are very evenly matched teams. They match up well with each other. So hopefully all the stars are out. Hopefully everybody gets to play and we see a good game in Philly. And the last game that we'll talk about, Bender, Commanders at the Buccaneers.
This is honestly the most exciting game for me, and I'm going to mention something that people may not have been thinking about. I'm picking the Commanders because Marshawn Lattimore has gone to the Commanders in the middle of this year, and Marshawn Lattimore is Mike Evans' kryptonite, and they don't like each other. It's going to be a fun matchup to watch because it always is, but they used to be division rivals because Lattimore played for the Saints, if you didn't know. That's going to be the matchup I'm looking for, and I think that's actually going to impact what Baker does, and I think the Commanders' defense is going to come out on top.
That's a really interesting take, and you're right. I haven't heard a lot of people talk yet about Lattimore being in Washington now. So this first round playoff game, you're going to get a Lattimore and Mike Evans matchup. It also makes me wonder if the Commanders will change anything that their defense does do, knowing like Marshawn Lattimore's background and his experience going against that division opponent at one time, the Buccaneers. So it'll be interesting to see what he can bring to that matchup beyond just like his own individual matchup too, to see if there's any just wisdom that he brings to that Commanders defense, because that's a really smart defense. Bobby Wagner's there now. A lot of brains on that Washington Commanders defense.
A lot of veterans as well, just in general. But I think this is the game that Jaden Daniels shows out, and I think he's going to actually stamp his spot in the league for sure this time. Now, Bo Nix, I don't think has that ability because the Bills are just the Bills. The Bills are going to whoop their ass and be done, but Jaden Daniels has the perfect matchup to go out and do his thing.
Yeah, the Commanders definitely have an easier draw for their rookie quarterback in the first round versus the Broncos. So either way, though, it should be a really interesting weekend of games. I don't really think there's a bad game on this list. Honestly, the Steelers-Ravens one might be the hardest to watch out of all of them.
Because it's the Steelers.
Because it's the Steelers. With that, though, this has been another episode of Life in the Stands podcast. Remember to like and subscribe. Comment down below which Super Bowl run you think was most improbable. And also let us know which low wildcard seed you think could go on an improbable run this year, the Steelers. Remember to like and subscribe. Appreciate everyone for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.